Welcome to the American Council of Hypnotist Examiners 20th Annual International Hypnotherapy Conference, held April 7th through the 10th, 2005. We now join this session recorded live in Glendale, California.
But first slide up as one of the letters that we get. I do presentations on stress management for a number of the medical groups up there, and have found that that's been a good inroad for us in our therapy practice. My name's Dennis Parker. I'm glad to be here, and just quickly by way of introduction, I was trained by Virgil Hayes, and I don't know if those of you who are long-timers may remember Virgil, some 15, 16 years ago when I first took my training. And then since then, I've also had a number of trainings here at the conferences over the years and so on. I've been actually doing this as certified since 1991, and got involved several years before that, before I actually stepped up to the plate and took the real training and those kinds of things. I'll tell you a little bit more of my background as we go along. But I'm grateful to be here and certainly feel like I'm a second generation from Gil, because Virgil was trained by Gil, and since then I've had a number of trainings from Gil himself. And other people in the organization have had a number of trainings from Orman and so on, as you have, and I'm certainly benefited by all of their experience and skills, and I'm grateful to them for that. I'm here because hypnotherapy and hypnosis has totally changed my life. I mean, if you want to talk about transformation and what's happened, I mean, I'm here because I'm grateful for what this process and these things that we've learned have done for me personally. One of the things that I always found, though, when Gil called me and asked me if I wanted to speak this year and asked for a subject, of all the subjects we could talk about, I thought the one that people talk to me most about is what do I do with resistant clients, and how do I get people to want to do their own work? And I have this philosophy that was instilled upon me by Virgil. He said this statement over and over again. He said, powerful people empower others. Weak people create dependencies. And it's always stuck with me that what my job is as a hypnotherapist, really, I view it more as a teacher of principles and process that have to be duplicatable by the student or the client on their own when they leave the office. And we have to put this stuff in such a way that they can utilize it continually in their lives and make it a lifestyle, not just an experience. A doctor. I'm a sales manager by trade. I may as well tell you that up front. I've used hypnosis and hypnotherapy to help hundreds of salespeople over the years overcome that fear of picking up that 50-pound telephone and make that next call. You understand? And I've helped hypnotherapy help lots of people increase their personal income, enrich their lives, and improve themselves in numerous ways in my current profession. In addition to that, so you understand, I've done this on a part-time basis for 14 years. I do it Tuesday, Thursday nights, and a lot of times on Saturdays. I learned to do this over the years because I've always had to work 2 or 3 jobs. Just real quickly, by way of reference, my wife and I, we have 11 children. And now we have 16 grandchildren, and I've always had to do 2 or 3 things to pay for those kids. Do you understand what I mean? Every time I could make $1, they needed 2. I don't know anybody. So this has been one of those things that not only has been life enriching to me, but has also rewarded my whole family by the financial benefits as well as we've helped other people. Okay? So with that being said, let's get into what we want to talk about today, because I normally do groups. And my individual, people who come in for individual sessions usually work with one of the therapists in the office. What I learned when I first got in practice was, because I was working full time doing this at night, I got so busy one time I was doing this every night of the week and all day Saturday. I was doing 2 sessions a night, all day Saturday, and I had such a lineup at that time of people because it was just, I couldn't keep up with it. So what I finally had to figure out was how can I do the same thing for 10 people at the same time I can do it for 1. So I came up with a process, which we won't have time to teach you today, but maybe next year, if I get invited back again, that might be the subject we could teach. Because what I found is that you can teach a process, and I had to simplify the process down to where anybody could duplicate it, both in a group and at home. And so the process in the group really became a teaching process of teaching them how to go home and finish up their stuff, besides what we could get done in class. Does that make sense? And so I found out, I could do a group of 100 people just as fast as I could sit here and work with you by the processes that we put together and the way we taught the program. Okay? And personally, as also for income-wise, I mean, I've heard real rates there. I heard one lady say she charges $400 an hour here. I heard another person say they get $125. I've heard people say they get $250. Utah, we're a little more frugal up there. You know, we don't charge those rates. But if you can get 10 or 12 or 15 people in your group at the same time, no matter what you charge, it adds up. Does that make sense? And I can do it in a group for a third of what I can charge like individually. So then it all still makes sense. So, but the problem even in a group is you're always going to get a mixture of all the different kinds of suggestibles. You're going to get intellectuals, emotionals, right? And of course, we all know the hardest to deal with is who? The intellectuals, right? They want to analyze everything. They want to answer to everything. They want to really understand everything. And what I found is before I will do any hypnotherapy or I work with a group, especially with intellectuals, I make sure that I have all their intellectual questions answered. I hear this sometimes. People say, I can't be hypnotized. I went to a hypnotist. He couldn't hypnotize me, yada, yada, yada. You ever get that? Right? So we haven't really fulfilled the agreement with these people, meaning they don't understand it well enough to trust you well enough to allow you to prompt them or induce them into trance. So it really is, as we keep talking about the rapport building process, but how do you build that kind of rapport with someone? You know, I start out by teaching them that our natural trance abilities have been called by many names. Now, I'm somebody that thinks you can call a rose by a million other names, and when it's all over with, it's still a rose. And we can call hypnosis, mesmerism, meditation, transcendental, this or that. All of those things are simply states that the mind goes into. That's my personal view. We'll debate it later. I don't have time right now. But the fact of the matter is that the mind does what the mind does. True? And we're not all that different. I mean, your mind doesn't really function that much different than mine. Your heart doesn't beat any faster, slower per se than mine. I mean, we're all pretty much in that same deal. When mesmerism came under criticism by Benjamin Franklin in the end of the 17th century, James Braid, who started the term hypnotism, observed somebody going into mesmerism, and he decided to rename it because mesmerism at that time had become an unpopular name. So he renamed the process hypnosis or hypnotism after the Greek word for sleep. Because he observed that when people went into trance, they went into a simulated sleep state. So the idea is that trance is not sleep, but it is a natural phenomenon. We never hypnotize anybody. They simply agree to go into trance or hypnosis at our suggestion. And when you tell that to intellectual people and you set them up for the idea that, you know, I'm not going to hypnotize you, you're going to have to learn to hypnotize yourself. I'm just going to teach you how. And that's what I'm all about, teaching people responsibility to become their own best therapist. You know, empower others. Have you ever done a rapid induction, slam somebody on the head and say, sleep? And they look at you and what in the world was all that about? Right? Because going into trance is a choice. I mean, they'll look back and say, geez, Louise. Right? And as one person said, well, I don't use rapid inductions because it scares people off. Even Norm said, you know, I don't use it on the first session because when you slap them in the head and yell sleep, or, you know, and I'm not slapping them in the head. You understand? I know how to do all that. But the concept is that when they feel that lack of control and they're already having a fear of being out of control, what did you just do to them? You put them on a defensive mode and they become more difficult to work with. Now, I believe in rapid inductions, even as Norm said, maybe on a second visit, third visit. Once they understand what you're doing, you say, you know, we can spend 20 minutes taking you into this fractional relaxation, or frankly, I'm going to show you a quicker way. How would you like to spend your money? Then you can do the rapid inductions and they'll cooperate and make that work. I don't know if that makes sense, but that seems to be the way it's worked for me. Okay? They could just as easily come out of the trance state because, again, hypnosis is a choice. Now, here's what I've observed, and I was taught by Virgil. And I know different people argue about this and say, well, there's 33 different trance states, and we can do an EEG scan, and there's hundreds of trance states. I don't know about all that. Here's what I know about. I know what I can observe. Now, if you think with me on this, I think you might have observed some of these same things. These are observable trance states that you can watch everybody go in or out of. The first one is what we call waking suggestion. Now, waking suggestion is a conscious state of mind. That's what you're in right now. Some people sit here, and if you notice some of your jaws have started sagging, your jaw's sagging right there, your jaw's over here, you get a little relaxed, but it's a conscious state of mind. You're sitting there somewhat relaxed, and you begin to have your jaw sag, your shoulders might sag a little bit. You just begin to rest, but you're really analyzing and logically thinking about everything I'm up there saying. You're in a conscious state of analytical decision. So we're going to call this consciousness. The next state is what we would call waking hypnosis. Waking hypnosis, people develop more of a sag in their shoulders. They're focused inwardly, like reading a book or watching a movie. What does it mean when somebody says, I didn't really get into the movie until the second act? What they're really saying is I didn't go into trance in my imagination, pretend and imagine that I was one of the characters, or I was the hero or the heroine, right? They didn't actually trance out as they did, or when they're reading a book. I love that book because, man, I got to be, in my imagination, all this stuff, right? Waking suggestion. Now, this is the same state that the world calls daydreaming. Hey, Johnny, pay attention here. Get your homework done and quit daydreaming. True? It's a place where we are focused inwardly, but we have our eye focus outwardly. We look at the mountains, but we're really where? Somewhere back in our own head. It's a dual state of consciousness. It's how we drive right past our exit on the freeway. Who's ever done that? We're consciously functioning on a dual level. We're driving down a freeway, but we're really thinking about something inside of our own head, and we go right past the exit. Sometimes we get a dryness in our throat, and some people get lacrimation or tearing of their eyes. The next state down, and I'm taking it from down, daydreaming down, is what we teach is a hypnoidal state. Now, in hypnoidal state, people develop total lethargy. They get real loosey-goosey. Muscle relaxation, but they'll also experience these single lab reaction jerks. Have your clients ever been sitting in a chair and all of a sudden their leg twitches? Huh? How many of you have been going to sleep at night and all of a sudden before you can go out to sleep you're kind of tensed up from the day and you just can't kind of relax? And as you're sitting there or laying there in bed, all of a sudden your whole body just goes, right? And who hasn't experienced that? The definition of that is that the mind accumulates accumulated emotional content throughout the day, and the mind is an electrical system, right? We have one frequency electrical impulse runs this finger, we have one runs this finger, so on and so forth. Well, as we begin to relax, both ourselves at sleep and our clients in trance, the mind will release, as you relax the mind as well as the body, the mind will release that accumulated emotional content in the form of electrical impulses, and as it dispenses out through the central nervous system, it causes a shock to the system. That allows us to go down into a deeper state of trance. Now, this is a state that you go into at night when you're laying there just before you go out to sleep. You have that jerk, and then you relax and go even deeper. It's also the state you're in the morning when you're coming awake and you haven't even moved the muscle. You know, you're laying there on the pillow, and as you're laying there on the pillow and you haven't moved the muscle, but your mind engages, and all of a sudden you become aware of the birds chirping outside, the dog barking, and everything, and you're laying there and you're going, but you're fully mentally engaged. You know what I'm talking about? But you haven't moved the muscle. The main definition of hypnoidal trance is the body asleep, mind awake. The body hasn't really fully engaged. You haven't really moved into trance. And this is a state that most people want to call meditation in my mind. Okay? It's what I do for stress therapy when I do stress therapy groups for large groups and conventions. We want to get them at least into hypnoidal because now we have the body asleep in the chair and you can get eye closure. And I always do eye closure. Some people say, well, I don't want to do eye closure because, well, they pop their eyes open. How do you ever prove to them that they're in trance? Because all these are natural states anyway. Some of you already slipped through these states already. And you say if you don't identify them for them, people never know that they were actually hypnotized. So if we have time, I'll show you how I do eye closure because I can usually get it with any number of people in any number of groups. Once in a while you get an intellectual, they'll go, they'll have to test it. That's hypnoidal. And I know I'm hurrying because this is usually a 4-hour pre-talk I do when I do groups. I don't rush through this stuff. I want people to be able to duplicate it when they're out of the office. Catalepsy is the next state down. Now, catalepsy accesses conscious and subconscious function at one and the same time. And if you watch the tapes from Gil, he always wants people like bring their hand up or touch their face, hold it in a certain position, or people will hold their hand out in a certain position. That's catalepsy. You get balance between extensor and flexor muscles when they're doing stage shows, and they want to have people stand in like body molding positions for hours. That's catalepsy. Okay? But in catalepsy trance, it also gives us the ability, with access to both conscious and subconscious functions at one and the same time, that's where we can really get down and start to do the work. If I were to ask this lady right now, what problem have you had, what experience have you had in your life that is still binding you down, holding you back, and keeping you from all you want to be from birth until now, what would it be? No, don't answer. Consciously, most people might think they know that, but subconsciously, most people don't know that because we buried it years ago with amnesia and denial. Our two primary defense mechanisms, amnesia and denial, I never want to feel that way again. I never want to think about that. Let's never talk about that again, right? Denial, well, it was no big deal. I get over it. Didn't mean that much to me anyway, I guess, right? Denial. So we bury those experiences that have actually bothered us the most, held us back, and are binding us down. But in catalepsy trance, consciously, she may or may not be able to answer that question, and you may not be able to answer that question. You may think you do, but in that state of trance, and what I teach people is, when we induce that state of trance, I can ask you that same question, and boom, up it comes. Because we bypass the amnesias and denials, we bypass the critical factor, and you have the ability now to deal with what is, not what you think might be. That's the value of everything we do. Trance gives us access to the information. Trance is the road, if you will, the freeway, if you will, to the real deal. So we want to achieve at least catalepsy trance, and as you know through your deepening techniques and the things your therapists have taught you, you know how to deepen people into those particular states and help maintain that state. That's part of the training. Not only do you get people in that state, but you have to then do trance maintenance. The next state down is somnambulism. Now, somnambulism is talked a lot about because people say, well, I want my clients to be somnambulistic because in a somnambulistic state, they're very highly suggestible, and they're very creative, and they can access their imagination. Now, somnambulism is the state that we say, and as I was taught, that you can amplify any thought from 0 to 2,500 times in your mind. Now, little kids are all natural somnambules, and most people don't come out of being a natural somnambule until sometime between the years of 7 and 10. And some people never come out of being a natural somnambule. I mean, there's people that will come into the office that are so somnambulistic that I never have to hypnotize them, and you don't either. Those are the ones that you say, sit down, close your eyes, relax, and go to sleep, and they do it. Those are the ones that really stage hypnotists are preying upon to do the stage show with, because they don't have to really hypnotize those folks. They just simply have to give them a few basic suggestions, and out they go. Your job in those situations is, and I'll be honest with you, this over my lifetime, I think I've dehypnotized more people than I've hypnotized. Because your job as a hypnotherapist is to dehypnotize natural somnambulistic people and help them find consciousness. Did anybody ever tell you that? That's the truth. As a hypnotherapist, you'll find that you do more dehypnosis than you will hypnosis as you deal with these people, if you're doing it, in my opinion, correctly. I'm just one voice out there, but you will find that you'll become a dehypnotist as well as a hypnotist, because these people need to find consciousness. This state of mind actually is a great state of mind if you want to be there intentionally. Now, the signs of somnambulism where the eyes roll up and they become fully lethargic, I got 16 grandchildren. When I pick those little dudes up and they've fallen asleep on the couch, you ask me if you don't see the same thing. You pick them up and their little bodies are just kind of, right? Totally lethargic. And if you ever watch, their little eyes roll up and you'll see the whites of their eyes right down here, but their eyes will be clear up at the top of their forehead. Is that not true? Somnambulism. Clients who are still natural somnambules, we put them into trance, immediately their eyeballs roll up to the top and they'll go total lethargic. Two primary signs so you can see and understand what you're dealing with. Now, somnambulism is a great way to work with people because these are the ones that guided imagery works on the best. They're already in their imagination. So if you want to use guided imagery and scripts and some of that kind of stuff, that works the best for somnambules. And you'll get along just fine. But if you really got to do hardcore therapy with an intellectual or somebody in a cataleptic state, then you've got to be able to do the rest of the therapeutic processes. The age regressions, gestalts, and so on and so forth. So somnambulism is a great state to be in intentionally if you want to be there for your own goal-directed and learning purposes. Now, they say that a little child learns at an over-amplified learning rate to adults of 2,500 times. I mean, it took us years as adults to learn how to be retarded, right? But it's also been proven, at least from what I've studied and been told, that an adult in the natural somnambulistic state can learn at that over-amplified learning rate again. And so if we have college students or we have people come in that want to take tests without fear and have learning skills and abilities, we'll take the time to teach them how to become naturally somnambulistic while they're in class and not stay there and be highly suggestible and vulnerable outside of class. Does that make sense? So it pays to understand what the mind is doing and what these people do naturally where we're at ourselves inside of our own head. The last state that we call it is the Esdale state. Now, the Esdale state was named again after Dr. Esdale, who was a British doctor who was working in India in about the 1850s, and he was a contemporary basically with Braid. He came to England on a trip, saw a demonstration, and saw the value of actually anesthetizing people for surgery through hypnosis or through trance. There's 4 characteristics to the Esdale state: temporary amnesia, natural anesthesia, lack of following suggestion, and catalepsy returns. Now, just a quick story on that. I was at a Boy Scout meeting, and we were at a first aid class, and there was an EMT up giving the class, and he says, and we were going through shock. You know, how do you treat someone for shock? You put the feet up, clear their tongue, you know. But he says, you know, it was funny, and I don't know why he told this story. He said it was funny that one day I rolled out to this construction site, and this fellow had fallen off his ladder, and he had a 2x4 that impelled him clear through his side. And he had this splinter coming all the way through the side of his body. But he says it was the funniest thing. He said he wasn't in shock. He was just walking around the job site and didn't even know what was going on. He made some other characteristics. After the meeting, I went up because I didn't want to interrupt everybody in the meeting. I said, let me ask you a couple other questions. I said, when you asked him to sit down and be still, did he do it? He said, no, he'd keep getting up and walking around. Anything else you asked him to do, would he do it? He said, no, he would just keep doing his thing. Lack of following suggestion. I said, did he even acknowledge or know that the 2x4 was in his side? He said, no, he wasn't even aware of it. And I said, was he feeling any pain? He said, no, he actually wasn't having any pain. I said, well, what he actually fell into is a defensive mode the body can choose to go into besides shock, which we call the Esdale state in hypnosis, which is a state of mind that is a defensive state where the mind defends the body and can actually block pain and block any other sensory perception. And I explained to him that our minds have the ability to block all sensory perception. If I go out to work with my horses on Saturday morning, and it really smells out there, and I haven't been used to it for a week, I've been on the road doing this kind of stuff, and I go back home and I'm cleaning up my horses and so on, the first 5 minutes out there, that thing really reeks. But after about 5 minutes, what does my mind do? It blocks it out because it finally perceives that that is unnecessary for the preservation of self. The subconscious function is to preserve self. Okay? One of the functions. And as an unnecessary preservation of self, my mind just shuts off that sensory perception, viewing it as not necessary for the preservation of self. If I'm going down the freeway and I'm talking on a cell phone and my boss calls and it's a very important conversation and the big semis are going on both sides of me, I can block out every other noise instantaneously except the voice coming through the phone. Can you not do that? And you do that automatically. Let me ask you this. After you've sat here for an hour or two, you're going to get up and become aware of your body again because I've got your mind so engaged right here that some of you are going to notice that your legs ache and tingle and have probably been doing so for some time, but you blocked it out because you didn't necessarily deem it as necessary for the preservation of self. You were in this Esdale state sitting here to that degree. Now, how many of you ever gotten up out of your chairs and noticed, oh man, my legs are asleep, we call it, right? But you didn't even notice it while you were sitting there because your mind had detached from that. To me, that is the root of all therapy. Getting the mind to detach from either the thought, the pain, the allergy, the sensitizing event, substance, situation. The Esdale state. I would take a couple questions here because usually I get a couple, but I don't want to get belabored on this. Yes?
People who arrive to an accident, are they fully aware of the Esdale state as opposed to ordinary hypnotic states?
I don't know that. I mean, I would know about their training. I would hope that the therapists that I've trained and getting started to would know that and could help with that, certainly. But well, yeah, that's going to take us off into a whole realm of therapy we don't have time to discuss today. But the best book on the Esdale state really is the Ellman book, the Green Ellman book. And he talks a lot about somnambulism and how to get people to go into this Esdale state. And he actually named the state the Esdale state. Yes? ADD? Okay, real quickly, I'm going to answer that one. Then I got to get back. Yeah, real quick. I think that there are some chemical imbalances and some things that can cause ADD. I don't deny that. Just like I think there is some real pathological viruses, germs, all that stuff. We all understand that, okay? But I also believe, as a lot of people tell you, 65 to 90% of all illness and disease is psychosomatically induced, meaning it's caused by some accumulated emotional content that's being dumped off in the body somewhere. Don't worry, you'll get a ulcer, right? And DISEASE is a dis-ease in the mind that eventually manifests itself somewhere in the body. The problem I have with ADD is this, with kids. The kids that I work with, and I don't have a lot of experience with it, Zolita Grant, who was here a year ago, did a great class on that for 3 hours, and you might look up her stuff because she works with it all the time. What I found is that the kids have something else on their minds that is more important to them in the current moment of time than what they're supposed to be doing. They're worried about when they get home, is Dad going to beat my mom tonight? Is Uncle Buck going to get out of jail? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And the one, I don't have time to give you stories. But I think if you work with our regular therapeutic processes on kids with ADD and you can find out what's really on their head and help them correct those thoughts and adjust it, all of a sudden the ADD just goes away. There's something that they're amplifying in their imagination to such a degree that is causing them to be distracted in the current moment in time. Is that fair enough? Okay. Okay. The other thing I teach people is this, is that we have this long technical definition. Hypnosis is a deeply relaxed state of hypersuggestibility in which suggestions more easily bypass the conscious mind and the critical factor and go directly to the subconscious mind to establish goal-directed selective thinking. In other words, it's the decision-making process. In other words, Mr. Client, my job here is to get you to make a new decision. At some point you decided to smoke. My job is to get you to decide not to smoke. At some point you decided to overeat. My job is to get you to eat properly. At some point you decided to not exercise. My job is to get you to want to exercise. But it's your decision. And I can't make that decision for you. But I will help you, prompt you, motivate you, encourage you, work with you to make your new decisions. Fair enough? Let them be their own best therapist. Put the responsibility on the client to make their own changes. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time on these questions because for the sake of time, I got something I think is more important for you to do today. An uninitiated client, I'm just going to run through these quick. You can kind of glance at them. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. I think you all know this from your other trainings. This is real basic. Will I lose control? Yada, yada, yada. But I do want you to know that I do review these questions with people, so you can just kind of glance through. Okay? I do answer the question about a stage show, though, and I always stop for people on that. Let me just give you that one real quick. I tell clients that a stage hypnotist has to create the illusion that Nanu Nanu, you are now in my power. And that illusionary power is what gives the stage show its entertainment value. Just like a stage musician has to create the illusion that rabbits come out of hats and pigeons come out of thin air and money comes out of your ear. But the fact of the matter is that no one is ever in anybody else's power and control. When I first got into hypnosis in Utah, I had a lot of people come up and say, what are you doing in mind control? My wife finally came up with the best answer for people. That she says, if it were mind control, we would have perfect children. And people who knew my family, I've never been accused of that. That's all I want to say about stage hypnosis. The point here, though, is that trance gives us access to every thought, feeling, emotion, touch, smell, and every sensory perception and every experience we have had from birth until now. Everything you've ever done, said, felt, smelt, anything you've ever done in your lifetime from birth until now is recorded in there. And trance gives us access to it. Okay? That's the benefit of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Why else would you do it? You don't have to sit there and fill out 25, 30, 40 questions. 10 of them mean that you think this and 20 of them mean that. Go into trance. Ask the right questions, and structuring the right questions and suggestions to elicit information is important. But that's what trance does for us. It gives us that ability to access. The beliefs we accept in our critical factor, I just remember what the other slide was. It goes this way. We deal with behavior modification in what I do. So here's the way it goes. You have a thought, and that thought will create, depending on how much you amplify that in your imagination up to 2,500 times, that thought in an over-amplified imaginary state, thought, emotion, behavior, because we tend to behave the way we feel. True? So we get up in the morning, we feel all grumpy, grouchy, and irritable, and how do we behave? Right. But that feeling is leading you to a thought. So all hypnotherapy is having trance access to find the thought, and we find the thought through the feeling. So when we hypnotize people, the access to the thought, we take them in, and I totally subscribe to Gill's transforming therapy. Remember, he starts with a feeling. You over-amplify the feeling. You over-amplify the emotion. And the emotion leads you to the initial sensitizing event, which in the initial sensitizing event, you will find the primary thoughts that are creating the behavior. And there's always one or two primary thoughts that are generating the behavior. And that's when we get to play therapist and become immediately challenging. that's when we actually have to do our best work. Is how do we change that primary initial thought to a new thought? And we all use different ways. I mean, I attended a class here the other night, somebody used Snoopy Dogg the comedy guy, and somebody uses Road Warrior. You know, I mean, there's all this stuff that we do in here, but the whole thing really boils down to changing that primary thought. Because once you've changed the thought, you've now changed the emotional content, so now you've changed the behavior. Does that make sense? Okay. So the hypnotist makes suggestions that you either accept or reject. Now, how do you know? This critical factor is an idea that most people like to know. If you reject the thought, if your client rejects the thought, how do you know when they reject it or you reject your suggestion? Because they'll have reacted off, right? As the thought comes in their conscious mind, if they analytically, logically think about it, if they accept that thought as being right, true, and correct for them, they'll allow it to go through their critical factor, their belief system, into their subconscious and stimulate subconscious functions of memory, imagination, and emotions. If they don't, they will just simply reject it at that point and kick it out. Now, I'm going to give you a little stimulus. Would you mind standing up and helping me for just a second? Real quick. This is a very simple stimulus. I really like the nice white sweater you have on today.
Huh?
That's very nice. I like that white sweater.
You do?
Yeah. Don't you?
No.
Why?
It's not white.
It's not white. Thanks. I gave her a thought, suggestion, right? Hit her critical factor. Did she allow it to go in and stimulate subconscious functions, memory, imagination, emotion, over-amplify it? No. She took a belief stand here that says, what's he doing? That's not right for me. And she rejected it. And how did she reject it? What was her ab reaction? Huh? And in that physical ab reaction, she rejected the thought. So when your people are sitting in a chair and they jerk, you know that they just ab reacted your thought, or they have another thought that they've put in place of that. And you can simply ask them, what was that thought? And in trance, they can come up with it and tell you. Okay? So, critical factor is this, and since we're out of time, I told you I usually do a 4-hour. And I'm talking as fast as I can. I hope you're listening fast. Yeah. The critical factor filter is what we are attempting to establish in their heads through hypnotherapy. That we can take all the stinking thinking out of the subconscious, memory, imagination, and emotions, pull it up, correct it, reestablish this critical factor filter so they never allow it to go back through. You understand? Everybody talks about how do you correct the root? The root is the primary core thought over here that's lodged in memory, imagination, and emotions. Through trance, we access all of that, bring it back to consciousness in a conscious state as we desensitize that initial sensitized event, change those thoughts, reestablish a strong enough critical factor that they don't let it back through. Now we have accomplished change. That's hypnotherapy in a nutshell, as they say. And the whole chart on the back is really great. Someday I'd like to explain that to you because I created it. In all these years of trying to tell people or explain to people how to make that happen. One of the things I do want to mention quick is it also fundamental to all the therapy that I do and that we do in our clinic there. I teach people this. I said, instructing the subconscious is not that big a deal. Now think about this. How many of you have ever had an important meeting at 6 o'clock in the morning, and when you went to bed you said, I must be up by 6 o'clock, I must be up by 6 o'clock, I must be up by 6 o'clock, and you're so worried about it you set 2 alarms in case one doesn't work, right? But what always happens when you do that intentionally, what always happens just before the alarm goes off, you wake up anyway. Because your internal clock works far better or just as well and if you want to teach your clients, begin to teach them and condition them to trust themselves and trust the trance process. One of the things I teach them is if I go to lunch and I'm by myself one day, which doesn't happen a lot because I work with customers, but if I'm out at the lunch one day and I have 20 minutes and I want to take a power nap, right? I kick the seat back in my car and I'll say, okay, I want to wake up in exactly 17 and a half minutes. I want to wake up in exactly 17 and a half minutes. I want to wake up. Now, the very fact I tell myself I want to wake up in 17 and a half minutes implies to my subconscious that I have to go do what? Go to sleep. So we learn to instruct ourselves in these ways that are, and then I'll kick the chair back in my car. I can instantly trance out. And what happens in exactly 17 and a half minutes? And I've never ceased to amaze myself. And you will too. But I teach clients those kinds of processes so they learn to trust the process of trance. One last thing, they said we could do a 30-second commercial, so I'll talk fast. One of the other thing that is totally part of all the therapy that I do is I believe everybody needs self-esteem. I believe everybody needs to understand these processes. And then in addition to the Understanding These Processes CD that I have here today, okay, and there's some brochures up here, and John has many more. He's hidden behind the counter back there, and I have more tapes upstairs, so if you really want them, I'll go get them all. But we have everybody listen to this Self-Esteem CD. It is an hour and 14 minutes of total programming for people to overcome their stuff. And what's different about these is that I put in there what I call therapeutic prompts. So people, the program is that they listen to the CD all night long while they sleep, and they will cause people to vent off their emotional content in their dreams. I've had lots of people say, well, I woke up, I was just sobbing in my sleep. But the next morning I woke up and I felt so much better. I have one health food owner that says, Dennis, he says, I finally figured out the bottom line to all your stuff in your CDs. He says, the more I listen to them, the better person I want to be. That's probably the best compliment anybody could ever give me. So I recommend those to you if you want to try them in your therapy practice. Get your clients working on those kinds of issues, as well as all the full-blown hypnotherapy that you do for them. And again, I thank you for listening. Maybe someday we can do the whole 4 hours. You've been a great group, and thank you for being part of ACHE. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes this presentation. Thank you for listening.